Dr. Paul Ekman is a recognized world expert in the field of kinesics, the study of nonverbal coding systems of bodily activity as related to human communication. Dr. Ekman classifies nonverbal signs into 5 categories: emblems, illustrators, adapters, regulators, and affect displays.
Most of nonverbal communication or nonverbal behavior is not a language. There's one element that is called emblems, symbolic gestures like I've just done. Now, this stands for AOK in our language group, that is in most but not all Western cultures. But this doesn't look like AOK any more than this looks like good luck, which is what it is in German. It's totally learned. It's a cultural product. There isn't much in the way of grammar that's usually used as a single item. I mean, I could say, hello, come on over here and sit down. That doesn't happen too often. It's usually a single movement. Now, in a sense, that's the least interesting aspect of nonverbal communication because it is so language-like. And it's voluntary. It's usually as deliberate as our speeches and as reliable or unreliable as our speeches. Now, the rest of nonverbal communication is primarily involuntary, much of it the product of our emotions, and not chosen, hard to inhibit, and therefore in some ways more reliable than words. Most of them are with the hands, although you can do it with your face. It illustrates speech. The most common way is an emphasis mark, much like a written accent, but you do it with your hands, usually with an increase in loudness in your voice, where you trace the flow of your thought, as I'm doing now, just as if you're a conductor conducting your own thought. And it doesn't have a particular accent, it just sort of goes with the flow. Interestingly enough, people pay more attention to people who use illustrators. There's a big difference between cultures in the particular kind they use. People from the Mediterranean area tend to use ones that draw a picture of something or show an action. East Europeans tend to use the ones that trace the mental locomotion. Although in this country, there's been such an influence of television that almost everybody uses the same repertoire that they see in the popular television actors. These adapters, or later I call those manipulators, these are movements in which one part of the body manipulates another part. Often it is the hands with a prop touching something. In the days when people smoked, they would play with matches, with cigarettes. Now you see people with a pen in their hand and just sort of do something that doesn't make any sense at all, except they're just being active. Women do this with their hair, men do this with their beard or stroke their mustache. So you can see people will, they're scratching, they're smoothing, they're supporting and holding. We tend to disbelieve people who show these kinds of movements, but our research has found that they're really quite unrelated to whether you're lying or telling the truth. They're more of a sign of nervousness. People differ in how many they show in the first place, but for almost everyone they'll increase with nervousness and they're not as evident when people are relaxed. The regulators, I originally proposed that you could really, there are movements like head nods and that seem to regulate the back and forth flow of conversation, but they're really not a separate class of behavior like emblems or facial expressions, but instead it's how these are sometimes used to regulate the process of conversation, whose turn it is to speak. I mean, you know, it's not too often that we're speaking at the same moment. We won't hear very well what the other person is saying. So there has to be turn-taking, and that's accomplished by regulators, regulative functions of both the sound of the voice. I let you know, usually with a pause, by looking at you, when I'm done with my turn, it's ready. I'm ready for you to speak. And that's regulating the flow of conversation. There are people, for reasonably dominant people, who interrupt others and take over when they haven't been given, in a sense, permission to. But most of us are more polite than that. And most of us don't like to talk to people who don't give us a turn to reply. Then it's as if they're just doing a performance, as if they're just giving a lecture. It's not a conversation. Affect display is just another term for facial expressions. So we all can, to some extent, put on expressions that we don't feel. We also follow what I call display rules, rules we learn not in school, but in the course of growing up, about what emotion we can show to whom and when we can show it. So this differs from one culture to another. So there's a lot of management of our expression, and there are these simulations, like in polite expressions, or when one is deliberately falsifying and lying about how we feel. They differ in very subtle but detectable ways, and most people miss it.
It has been said that the face is the mirror of the soul. The range, complexity, and subtlety of emotions expressed by the human face is astounding. Studies have recorded over 5,000 different expressions